Okay, before getting started with what I want to get into in this video, I need to issue a disclaimer. And that disclaimer goes something along the lines of the following. I do not know what I'm talking about when it comes to astronomy, space, astrology, and everything that goes along with those subjects in general. I am the proverbial amateur. So it's entirely possible that some of what I get into here will be wrong. And I hope that you will correct me if you see me say something that is, or hear me say something that is incorrect. But disclaimers aside, in this video I want to get into Sirius, and specifically the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B. Now, for those of you who don't know, Sirius is orbited by a small white dwarf, Sirius B, some 10 magnitudes fainter than Sirius itself. The period of the orbit is very close to 50 years. And this is a picture where because Sirius is so bright, it's literally the brightest star in the sky. It's oftentimes very difficult to see Sirius B down here, so they had to adjust the exposures just to be able to see it when it's juxtaposed against the brightness of Sirius A. But when you get into this subject, you are confronted with a few specific scenarios. And the first one is that Sirius is simply used by the mystery schools of ancient secret societies as a metaphor for enlightenment, as it were, or their version of enlightenment. And this is Isis, Osiris, Horus, in the sense that in Egypt, Sirius was the star of Isis. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, with that little note there, I went over this in the video Esoteric Gods of Egypt, where I discussed how you can break down Isis and Osiris to represent the human eye, to where it's eyes, two eyes, and then it's the iris of the two eyes. So you have the myth of Isis and Osiris being essentially married to each other in the way that your pupil is married to your iris, which composes the two eyes. And then you have the phrase that is often repeated, no man hath ever unveiled Isis. And the point of that in the mystery schools is that no man himself or woman has the ability to actually tear the veil from their own eyes to see the truth. This is something that has to be done in conjunction with higher powers, as it were. And that's why they would say no man has ever unveiled Isis, or the mystery of the eyes and its design as far as perception of the visible spectrum goes, right? There's so much outside of our limited visible spectrum that we are not capable of unveiling to ourselves physically. It's something that has to take place in a different dimension, as it were. So anyway, if you don't know what I'm talking about as far as Isis, Osiris, Horus, and the eyes, iris, melding of the left and right brain, check out that video and I go into it in greater detail. And for that reason, I'm not going to go too much further into it right now, other than to note that this is the Wadjet of Horus, and many people have shown how this is very similar to the interior of the brain. And so you can see how they would represent Horus as the son, as it were, of Isis and Osiris, going deeper than simple ideas such as Horus is the horizon, going deeper in the sense that this is actually representing the central brain, and the idea that the left and right brains merge into this singularity that is the result of enlightenment, quote unquote. And then obviously there's all the myths about the pineal gland in the center of the brain too. So in Egypt, Sirius was the star of Isis, and from this, the Freemasons adopted reverence for Sirius as a metaphor for the goal of speculative masonry, given the fact that it's the brightest star in the sky. This can be seen on all the lower degree Masonic tracing boards. For example, here's a couple where you have the sun, the moon, and then Sirius in the middle. And I'm not just making that up. The Masons themselves admit that, yes, this is the blazing star that we refer to. It's Sirius. And then this can be further seen in the writings of Crowley and Blavatsky, who similarly revered Sirius for the same reasons. Blavatsky claimed that it was, the sun behind the sun. It's what kept the spirit realm alive. And of course, she was just relaying what other writers had written about Sirius. And then Crowley started the AA, or Order of the Silver Star. And you can read quotes from Kenneth Grant, who confirms, yes, this is the star that Crowley was referring to. It was Sirius. So there's this whole tradition in all of these occult societies and writings that revere Sirius for some reason. So one of the scenarios here is that, yes, like most of the things that they write about, it's not meant to be taken so literally. It's metaphors for the process of quote unquote enlightenment, or what they refer to as enlightenment. I mean, we could get into all sorts of debates about whether or not what they are referring to is actually any form of legitimate enlightenment. But when you get into the information about Sirius, you're inevitably going to run upon information relating to the second scenario here, which is, apart from its general importance in mundane terms, such as the helical rising of Sirius coinciding with the summer solstice and annual flooding of the Nile, there is a deeper relationship between the orbits of Sirius and our sun. And before going further, just as it relates to the importance of Sirius to the Egyptians, there are many people who have gone over how the actual Great Pyramid itself, the Queen's Chamber, was aligned to Sirius, and its light at certain alignments would actually pierce through into the Queen's Chamber. And at certain points in time, celestially important alignments to these societies, they would perform various rituals inside the actual Great Pyramid itself. This is back when Thuban was the pole star, this alignment that they're referring to. But there's all sorts of researchers, I'll use that term loosely, who have gone into these sorts of alignments that are going on. And it really is with some merit that these ideas have been explored, because you can go to things like Cahokia and see that the mound structure there is clearly in the same orientation as the Pleiades. Where Monk's Mound, the largest mound in Cahokia, is actually, kind of referencing the sun and a certain, alignment with Pleiades, and, kind of the importance of that celestial alignment. And this really encapsulates the whole thing in the sense that, according to official history, the mound builders, as it were the natives of America. And according to official history, these natives were quote unquote savages who were not instructed in mathematics and all of the things that go along with civilization that would allow a group of individuals to be able to build something like this on the earth, that it would precisely mirror something that they were viewing in the sky. So obviously the two narratives don't fit together. If these mounds were being built by natives, that does not fit with the narrative that they were savages, as it were. It fits with the narrative that they were very intelligent and observant of the cycles in the sky, to the point where they replicated them on the earth as sort of monuments to maybe things that had happened in the past, or whatever way you want to interpret it. So obviously, if this is taking place in America, it's not a stretch at all that it would have been also taking place in Egypt. which is considered much more intelligent than some of the native alignments go, or the native megalithic structures go, and the alignments that they represent. So, going back to Sirius, when you get into the actual paths of the stars and you focus on Sirius, well, then you run into this idea that there's a deeper relationship between Sirius and the sun, to the point where they are actually binary companions. In conventional astronomy, the accepted theory is the lunisolar wobble theory, which explains the precession of the equinoxes. But the alternative to this theory is that if true, the binary relationship between the sun and Sirius produces the seasonal ages within the great year, as Plato called it, such that the sun and Sirius are actually moving around each other. And this is represented here in this diagram, right? Which, if this is true, it would be you'd have Sirius here moving this way, and then you'd have the sun moving the opposite way. But the Vesica Pisces here would be where their orbits actually came very close together. And you'll see this all throughout YouTube. There's all kinds of people who talk about this, to where they say that, yes, as a result of this binary system between the sun and Sirius, we have the different ages, where when they're the furthest apart from each other, it's the Iron Age, and this represents a low consciousness in mankind. And then as they get closer and closer together, we eventually get to the Golden Age, where consciousness is at its highest point. Just in general, this sort of information has the feel of the messianic programming, in the sense of how the religions use it, where it's like, oh, well, this Messiah will save you, and all you need to do is believe in that Messiah, and you will be saved too. And so this is kind of a similar thing, where it's like, oh yeah, things might be bad right now, but 12,000 years from now, the sun and Sirius are going to be back in the golden zone here, and consciousness is going to be so high that we're going to be gods on earth. And you see how it's kind of like a similar narrative at work there, where, well, yeah, things kind of stink right now, but what are you going to do? We're in the Iron Age. So I view this very, very skeptically, as far as how this information is being portrayed out there. But at the same time, okay, I'm down for a thought experiment just like anybody else. And hey, maybe this is actually going on between the sun and Sirius, and they are binary companions. But let's pump the brakes. Let's see what the official narrative is as far as this subject goes. So this is a post that I found on a forum, and I will just read it real quick here. Observing the motion of the stars is something that humans have been doing for a very, very long time, and can be measured in centuries, if not longer. Understanding celestial mechanics helps quite a bit too. The further you get from our sun, the lower the escape velocity needed. This is due in part to the gravitational influence of our sun. For example, if you are as far from the sun as the Earth, to escape the sun's gravity and not remain in orbit, you'd need to exceed 42 kilometers per second. However, if you are as far as Neptune, you need to be going only 7.7 kilometers per second. Using the formula in the link I provided, you can calculate what the escape velocity is at 1 light year from our sun if you want. It's about 167 meters per second. At 4 light years, halfway from here to Sirius, right, Sirius is about 8.6 light years away, they say, it is about 84 meters per second. Our sun is moving at about 220 kilometers per second around the center of our galaxy, and at about 20 kilometers per second relative to the nearest stars. In other words, it's moving much too fast to be in orbit around Sirius or any other visible star for that matter. So, yes, I know there's all sorts of debate about the heliocentric model and its validity. However, if you go by that model, The sun is moving much too fast to be in orbit with Sirius. And then here's another counterpoint to this that I found. This simply isn't true at all. The most common type of star are red dwarfs. Red dwarfs are more commonly from single star systems, not multi-star systems. If we look at our neck of the universe, single star systems are also more common. Then there's also the fact that if a yellow dwarf, like our sun, are in a multi-star system, it is more commonly in one with other yellow dwarfs. That's very interesting, right? If true. So if our solar system were binary, it would be very obvious. Not to mention that life probably wouldn't be able to survive. What you propose actually goes against the norm, and this was in response to this theory that was put out there that Sirius and the sun are actually in a binary system orbiting each other. Now, I have to say that I found this post on a Reddit thread, and Reddit is great because it's one of the most censored forums on the internet. So if you want to know what the official propaganda is about something, you can just go to the Reddit thread about it and it'll be plastered all over it. So it's very useful as a research tool if you want to see what an official narrative is on any subject. Now, obviously, we're going to take this idea here and the heliocentric model with the same grain of salt that we're going to take the alternative explanation about the binary star system. And taking the heliocentric model with that same grain of salt, as far as their explanation of the precession of the equinoxes go, then you have the counterpoint to that here. Some may believe that the precession of the equinoxes is caused by the slow and steady wobble of the Earth's poles, caused by gravitational forces from the moon, sun, and partially Jupiter. The odds of this occurring naturally because of gravity are astronomical, to say the least. The alternative is that we are in a binary orbit with Sirius, which takes 24,000 years to complete. The reason for using the 24,000 year figure and not the 26,000 year one, which is currently calculated based on the movement of the stars, is because as the two stars approach each other, the closer they get, the faster they will travel. 4,000 years from now, the rate of precession will increase. The Greek astronomer Hipparchus created his star catalog in 129 BCE. While comparing his observations with those made by earlier Babylonian astronomers, he noticed that the stars had shifted, or rather that the Earth itself had shifted. He calculated that the rate of precession was 1 degree per century, which is very close to today's value of 1 degree for every 72 years. See, for example, I have no idea what that sentence just meant. So I'm totally ignorant of the subject. His estimate would make sense as Helios would have been traveling at its slowest velocity relative to Sirius at this point in history, around the time it was changing from red to blue. And it's also debated, based on what I'm reading, that Sirius itself was actually red. What they say is that stars moving away from our perspective have a redshift, and this is why they've come up with the explanation that the universe is expanding, because they can see so many stars redshifting, and this is evidence that they're moving away. And in the past, a lot of the ancient astronomers have referred to Sirius as ruby red. And so there's accounts of it being referred to as a red star, and they use that as an explanation for why Sirius might be viewed as red in the past, because it was actually, in this part of the cycle we're in, it was moving away from our perspective, or this is Sirius here, moving away from our perspective, so it would be red shifting to us. And then now we view it as this blue star because it's moving towards us. But there's also counterpoints to that where logically it's stated that the etymology for Sirius in Greek is scorcher, and it's associated with summer months due to the heliacal rising during the summer solstice and, you know, the dog days of summer and all that, which I'll get to later when we get further into Sirius A and B. But they speculate that, well, maybe they were just referring to Sirius as red due to its association with heat and the summer and everything that goes along with that. And maybe it wasn't necessarily red shifting away from us, as it were. So that was just kind of going more into detail as far as this potential binary star relationship goes. And obviously, the one that is really promoting it is Walter Cruttenden, and he even started a binary research institute. And you can learn more about those theories if you go read into that. But again, that's outside the scope of what I really want to get into. However, I just wanted to put all this out there as, one of the potential relationships that are out there as far as Sirius and the sun goes. So then there's a potential third scenario. If gravitational physics and the heliocentric model is accurate, such that Sirius can't be orbiting the sun in a binary system due to the actual speed that the sun is traveling, then possibly there is some other kind of electromagnetic relationship between Sirius and the Earth, making it more than just a metaphor for achieving a state of enlightenment. And this is where we're going to get into Sirius A and Sirius B. So this is the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B. It is officially 50.1284 years now. And obviously, like, straight away, looking at the orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B, it looks very much like DNA does, of course. The way it's spiraled in the same way that a DNA molecule is supposedly and allegedly spiraled around itself. So just from a visual perspective, that's very interesting. Given the importance of Sirius, whether it's metaphorically or literally, how interesting that the actual orbit of Sirius A and Sirius B has an ecliptic to the point where it actually spirals around itself and looks very much like we have been told DNA looks like. Very interesting. So that's the first thing that we have to point out here. The second very interesting aspect is that, let's see if I get the right picture here. Yeah, here we go. Is when you look at the ecliptic of Sirius A and Sirius B. I don't know about you, but if you move the ecliptic of Sirius B and put it right closer here, I mean, it really looks like a human eye. And so, going back to the Masonic tracing boards, that this one doesn't have it in particular, but often they'll have the star Sirius with the actual eye in it. And it's very interesting. I wonder, I put this in a blog post years ago, but I'm just thinking of it right now looking at this. This looks very similar to how CERN is constructed. I wonder if you compared the measurements of Sirius B to Sirius A as far as like their diameters go and all of that, if it would proportionally mimic the relationship between Sirius B and Sirius A. Interesting. Anyway, so that's the first thing. In looking at the orbit of Sirius B and Sirius A, you have this imagery evoked of an actual eye, and then you have the orbital evoking images of DNA. So, interesting start, right? But focusing on Sirius A and Sirius B for now, the orbit is officially 50.1284 years, which, if you do the math, and I think I did this right, is 50 years and 28.5 days. So then you have the periapsis, the point at which an orbiting object is closest to the body it is orbiting, and maybe this could be viewed as like the summer relationship between the two. And then you have the apopsis, or apoapsis, I don't know how you pronounce that, which underscores again how little I know about all this, which is the point at which an orbiting object is farthest away from the body it is orbiting. And then if you use the official information and you just count backwards from how they've established these 2 points in time, you can see where the various orbitals have been the furthest away from each other and the closest to each other. And this is really interesting to me now that as we speak, we are about to go through the apopsis or apoapsis period of Sirius A in relation to Sirius B, where they are going to be the furthest that they are away from each other in August, September of 2019. Depending on, I didn't do the math, but you'd have to do the math and then find the exact day. And so I believe it's sometime in late August, early September, based on all of this math. Now, it wasn't until around the 1860s that the scientific establishment, an actual astronomer, discovered officially the existence of Sirius B. There was an astronomer I was reading who postulated that it existed based on the movements of Sirius at the time. They postulated, hey, there has to be another mass nearby that's causing these irregularities. And then this was confirmed in the 1860s, officially, that it was a 50-year orbit. The thing is, it's so hard, like I said, for them to determine the exact orbit because the brightness of Sirius A obscures Sirius B so often. It's hard to get like the exact measurement, so they build in a little margin of error. So it was officially discovered in the 1860s, I believe. What's so fascinating, though, is that when you look at, so this is going back to the third scenario, and maybe I'll just read that again. So if gravitational physics and the heliocentric model is accurate, such that Sirius can't be orbiting the sun in a binary system, then possibly there is some other kind of electromagnetic relationship between Sirius and the Earth, making it more than just a metaphor for achieving a state of enlightenment, as it were. The original gold, which is the sun, and silver, the moon, face values were 50 to 1. Like on the actual gold coins produced by the US Mint, the original first face values was $50 for gold and $1 for silver. So it just so happens that that original gold to silver ratio of 50 to 1 was exact as far as the relationship of Sirius A to Sirius B and its orbit. And then you have the Julian calendar, which is set to renew when Sirius reaches its highest point or meridian on the sky at the midnight hour on January 1st. And so this is amazing to me that, everyone around the world is celebrating New Year's Eve, having all of these parties, and, probably a fraction of a percentage know, I didn't even know this until I researched this, that, oh, this is actually when Sirius is at its highest point in the sky all year. Like, is that an accident? Of course not. So obviously, if the Julian calendar itself was centered around the actual path of Sirius, and then you have all of these little anecdotal things like the gold silver ratio originally being 50 to 1, where gold and silver are used in almost all electronics, and they're very evocative symbolically of electrical circuits. Well, maybe that's kind of indicative of a relationship between Sirius electromagnetically and our sun and Earth itself. And I guess along those lines, what I find the most interesting is the fact that the sun has obviously changed colors to the point where the sun itself looks like Sirius A. I mean, it's blue, white, brilliantly bright in the same way that Sirius A is in the sky. So is there something to this precession of the ages in the sense that the actual sun itself goes through seasons where the color itself is changing because it's charged with more energy or a different dimension of energy that we then perceive as a much brighter sun than what we were used to. And then obviously the whole 2012 time marker plays into that, where that was the marker in these ancient star system calendars of a shift of the ages. And on each side of 2012, the sun began to change. Sort of in that 30-year period from 1990 to 2020 right now, the sun has undergone a transformation. And perhaps that relates to some larger cycle involving Sirius on a cosmic seasonal scale. But this is where it really gets interesting. So I came across this video like 4 or 5 years ago, and they took this information about Sirius A and Sirius B and the orbit. Now, their actual data was based on a 49.9 year orbital and not the 50.128 year orbital. So these data points might be slightly off. I mean, not by much, right? Like 49.9 and 50.1, that's probably 50 days or so, 50, 60, 70 days, which, I mean, hey, that's a good chunk of the year, but it's not going to be, it might shift like one of these years from 94 to 95. If it was, in November of that year, maybe it would shift it into 1795, but it's not going to be way off, if you get what I'm saying, in the sense that this pattern would hold. And so this is crazy, right? This person took July 4th, 1776, due to the way that America, of course, was founded by Freemasons and founded by the mystery traditions. In other words, founded by people that knew all of this well before it was ever published in official scientific literature, who knew all of the ancient traditions about the paths of the stars, and then they literally built Washington, D.C. in line with a lot of the star alignments. And so this person did a radiograph, I believe this is called, and plotted all of the data points for Sirius A and Sirius B and the orbits. And starting in July 4th, 1776, and ending on August 31st, 2019, which based on the 49.9 marker is when the apoapsis will be, based on that 49.9. So it's probably closer to like late September, maybe, with the added days this year in 2019 will be the quote unquote winner of Sirius A and Sirius B. But here's the crazy part, right? You start with 1776, you end with essentially the end of 2019, going into 2020. And especially considering this in light of everything that's happened since 9/11 and how America is being dismantled and how it was done through Bush to Obama to now Trump. And you can see how from 1776 to 2019, you're essentially encapsulating the entire existence of the United States of America. To the point where I hope you get my drift here, that this was all planned out 300 years in advance, okay? Or not technically 300 years, but, 200 plus years. Right? Because using that data point, you have a literal pentagram. That this pattern comes out to. I mean, that's incredible that this would take place. Right? Because then you have, this gets into a whole little like sync minefield where you have the District of Columbia, right? Washington, D.C., and you have the fact that Columba, the actual constellation, was a part of Sirius and Canis Major, I believe it's referred to, before it was officially designated with its own constellation, Columba, in like, I think the 1600s that happened. But anyway, so you have this pentagram formation of the paths of Sirius A and Sirius B. You have all of the alignments that are sort of evocative of how the Egyptians aligned everything to Sirius and the importance that they gave to that star. And then you have the actual columbine flower, which itself is a pentagram. And then you have the actual Columbine shooting, which took place in 1999 and at 11:19 a.m., right? 9/11. So you have this 9/11 Columbine pentagram resonance, and you see how this brought in the era of the mass shooters. This was the first one. And that was right on the heels of September 11th, 2001, where you have the actual Pentagon itself that had its ground broken on September 11th, years prior to actual September 11th, 2001. So you have that whole Pentagon pentagram resonance happening, which just so happens to be the radial distribution of all of the cycles of Sirius A and Sirius B over the 50-year periods. That's incredible. And I guess I'll just get into it real briefly right now. Like, obviously, the most famous aspect of Sirius being related to 9/11 is Sirius, the rescue dog, who was the only dog killed on 9/11. And, again, Sirius is in the constellation Canis Major, and so it's always been known as the dog star. So you have this dog named Sirius dying on 9/11, and, all of the other stuff that's going on there, which is just too much to get into. But a lot of people don't know that on 9/11/2000, President Clinton actually met Sirius the canine, and K is the 11th letter in the alphabet, right? So it's 9/11 backwards. Just going back to the whole Canis Major thing. So, yeah, a lot of people don't know that happened. So you have literally on 9/11/2000, President Clinton meets the dog that's going to die on 9/11/2001 in this mega ritual. So, this is, again, is just more subconscious stuff that was out there. And then you have the fact that the stars on the flag are actual pentagrams themselves too, relating it back to this whole pentagram resonance that's taking place. So that was just 5 cycles going from July 4th, 1776 to 2019, and what that might portend about the future of America. I mean, we can all see what's happening in that respect. But then there was another one that did 6 cycles, which went all the way from July 4th, 1776 to 2069. And then you can see that it's likewise a very pleasing geometric pattern that's just has an extra cycle in there that isn't necessarily the pentagram. This would be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be a 6-sided figure. But yeah, obviously not the same impact that this potentially is underscoring as far as the creation of America goes and its future, as it were. And then there's the whole thing, right, where 2019 is going to end and we're going to go into 2020, and you have all those phrases about hindsight being 2020, 2020 vision. Like, is there something going on here as far as our own vision and how, everything's going to be so obvious in hindsight once we reach this certain energetic stage of the Earth's electromagnetic field and its relationship to the ionosphere, the ionosphere's relationship to the magnetosphere, and the larger magnetosphere's relationship to the sun, and then the sun's potential relationship to Sirius and other stars that are relatively close to us. It's all very fascinating, but I brought all that up because it's very interesting to me how Game of Thrones plays into this, and how for the past, I don't know how long Game of Thrones has been on the air. Is it like 6, 7 years at this point? Just repeatedly over and over again, they've been saying, winter is coming, winter is coming, winter is coming. And so I was just messing around with the whole Sirius thing, Sirius A, Sirius B. But because of the fact that when you look at the apopsis that's going to take place in late 2019, this year, you have coincidentally the end of the Game of Thrones series on television anyway. That's literally happening in 2019. Meanwhile, they've been saying this winter is coming, winter is coming, winter is coming, which takes on a whole new element to it when you're juxtaposing it with this whole 1776 to 2019 layout of Sirius A and Sirius B orbitals, and the pentagram and how that relates to the establishment of America and everything they built into Washington, D.C., Columbia, the dove, right? Because in the actual series, television series, Game of Thrones, you have the white raven that gives the signal that winter is actually here. And so you have that whole White Dove Columbia resonance in the actual series Game of Thrones. I think I put that down here somewhere. I just got to it a little earlier than I thought I would. Or maybe I didn't write it at all. Yeah, so there's the whole White Raven lore throughout Game of Thrones about how the appearance of the White Raven would mean that winter was here. And so they're saying the whole time, winter is coming, winter is coming, winter is coming. And then we have this television series saying winter is here, which is just so happening to coincide with the winter, as it were, between Sirius A and Sirius B. And then you have, on top of that, the actual villain in the series, which is the Dead or the White Walkers, and you have their eyes, which are resonating with Sirius as the bright blue star, and just their blue nature in general. And so, you know, you get into this whole thing where it's like, oh, here's the picture that I was going to show. This is the White Raven at the end of one of the seasons that says, yeah, winter is here, which kind of, you know, announces the arrival of the White Walkers. And it's the whole thing, right? The White Walkers are literally like the blue white star Sirius, you know. And let me put it this way. This is a fictional universe, right? So that means that even if the binary interpretation of the sun and Sirius is not technically correct, they can still put that into fiction as a metaphor for what's going on. And I think that's what Game of Thrones is doing with the whole White Walker thing. Especially because the actual origin of the White Walkers, it's not actually revealed in the book, but in the television, I mean, so I'm told, I haven't read the books, but the White Walkers in the television series are created by the Children of the Forest, who created them as a weapon against the First Men or the royal bloodlines of Westeros. So you see here what George R.R. Martin was putting into his book, or at least what the television series put into this here, which is, okay, the Children of the Forest, these are the native people that are connected to the earth who are being warred with and fought with by the First Men, or these colonizers, the first royal bloodlines of Westeros, who are where all of the descendants have come from that we know from the story, who are all descendants of these bloodlines that were the First Men, as it were. And so you have the song of fire and ice, right? The red and the blue. And that goes back to America, red, white, and blue. And it goes back to the accounts of Sirius as a red star and a blue star. And then you have the whole thing of it being a blue-white star. So you have the red, white, and blue in there. And then you have the fact that the literal character Jon Snow, now granted, Snow is just the designation that is given to children born out of wedlock in the series, but hey, the main character's name is Jon Snow, evoking winter. And then you have Sirius the Dog Star, which is also referred to in other cultures as the Wolf Star. And so you have the part of the family, that the bloodline that he comes from, which is the Starks, who are flying the wolf banner, and they have this special relationship with wolves, right? The Dog Star, Sirius. And then you have Jon Snow's particular makeup, where he's half Stark and half Targaryen, and the Targaryen is the fire element. They control the dragon. So you have this song of fire and ice. And then you have fire and ice coming together, which, if you go with the binary interpretation of Sirius and our sun, well, that's fire, our sun, coming together with ice, Sirius, in the next age. And so you see how that sort of Yuga cycle idea is in the actual series Game of Thrones itself, because Daenerys at one point says that she's going to break the Iron Throne. And you have, right, the Iron Bank that is running the finances of all these royal bloodlines. So you have, I don't know how it's going to end, right? They haven't done the last season yet, but you have all of these elements coming together where you can see how the story will probably end in some way, where fire and ice come together closer, right, to end the Iron Age and the Iron Bank, as it were, or the Iron Throne. So they're putting that metaphor in there about this age of transitions, the new order of the ages, where leaving the Iron Age into this new period. And I don't know how they'll set that up in the actual series, but I won't be surprised if that's sort of how it's in play. But it's interesting, right, how this is kind of evocative of the fact that, you know, the children of the forest, as it were, created this weapon that is going to potentially kill a lot of civilization in this mythical universe. And you apply that to the as a metaphor that's going on in the real world, and it's like, you know, these royal bloodlines might be a little worried about what's going on here, you know, as far as their eventual future goes, right? Because especially a lot of the characters that are even descendants of those bloodlines, they've kind of broken rank with their family tradition. You know, that's especially evident with the Lannister characters, right? And even, you know, the Daenerys as a Targaryen, who is, you know, breaking rank with those traditions. So I don't know. I was just messing around with the whole Game of Thrones thing, but, you know, just in general, it could be something that's resonating, portending the potential for a mini ice age too. You know, if you look into the sunspot activity, the sun could be going into one of its Dalton or Maunder minimum periods in the future. And so this could be the way, even in general, above, you know, Sirius A and Sirius B, or Sirius's relationship to the sun potentially. Well, this could be just a way of subliminally programming the idea of winter is coming. You know, there's this mini ice age coming, or there's this tremendous change in our climate on the earth coming. And along those lines, there was one other thing I wanted to mention. And well, this is coming from a very dubious source. This is coming from Preston Nichols, who is a self-professed time traveler. So obviously we're going to take this with we're going to tread carefully on this one. But he says something in his book here, The Music of Time, that I think is probably happening. So I'll read it here. When they actually filmed Star Wars, I literally saw two psychics or adepts that were concentrating on the camera as it was running. They were putting some sort of psychic overlay on the film. I recognized what they were doing because it was similar to what I had done with musical recordings. I assume that Lucas learned the technique on his own. Although it is not necessarily known to the public at large, it is not really a big secret that you can put images on film, audio tape, and phonograph records. I believe this is why the Star Wars movies achieved unprecedented popularity. So yeah, obviously we all know about subliminal programming and how they're embedding frequencies and images subconsciously onto the actual moving pictures, as it were, that are just going right into the subconscious mind because the flicker rate is too fast for the conscious mind to perceive, and they just go right in there. That's definitely happening in television, movies, and then frequency-wise, it's happening in all the popular music. But this is something even deeper that, you know, outside of the highest initiated actors, they wouldn't even know this is going on. They would just be two people that are viewed as part of the set, that are always there on set, and they probably have some official designation that's innocuous that no one would even think twice about. But you have these adepts that are on the actual film sets of the most important series and movies that are meant to manipulate the collective psyche in the most dramatic way. I can definitely see how they would be actually concentrating on the camera as it was running, trying to put a certain energy into the film or whatever they're doing itself that will actually move people or have them view the situation in a certain way. And I definitely think that's probably going on. I mean, that seems very realistic to me. Because, you know, speaking of Game of Thrones, it has this unprecedented popularity. Like, everyone watches it, and it has this pull on the collective psyche. And, you know, part of that is, okay, it's a good show, but, you know, there's something much deeper at work here. And, you know, just going over some of what I went over here as far as it might be relating to our relationship with Sirius, I think there's probably some of that at work here, especially how they wrote into the television series the whole idea of the children of the forest, someone connected to nature developing a weapon that is being used to potentially destroy civilization. And that is a really big metaphor for what is kind of going on in the underground scenes of reality in this realm right now. Reconnecting to nature is having a significant impact on the agenda. And this was written into the television series, and I can almost guarantee they will end it the same way Lost did. Lost did the same thing where, that whole saving the island thing was about saving that thought form, that controlled civilization. And they get you to identify with those characters in Lost so much that you have this emotional reaction to the characters that are actually being used. While it seems like it's giving them purpose, it's actually being used to protect the system itself. I would not be surprised if they did the same thing with the actual film in Lost, as it were, because that had a similar impact on the collective psyche. But they will end the Game of Thrones series in a similar way where there's going to be a lot of characters that die. There's going to be the hero characters, but eventually they're going to save the existing order from the dead who were created by the children of the forest, right? It's all this, evil thing, right? From the perspective of the living, as it were, where it's going to be some revolution where, like I said, a bunch of people die. There's going to be the heroes that survive, and they're going to create this perceived new structure that gets rid of, all the bad old stuff. But really, it's the same system being protected. And that was the same thing they did in Lost, where they had the character Hugo become the next, caretaker, as it were, for the island. And, Benjamin Linus says to him, oh, well, that was just the way Jacob did it. You can do it any way you want. So they're going to do the same thing with Game of Thrones. I mean, that's my prediction. I don't know if it'll really end this way, but that was part of the reason I wanted to put this out there before I did a bunch more research into all this and sounded like I knew more than I really do, or I would know more in the future than I do about all this right now. But I wanted to get it out there before Game of Thrones starts again and before I have to get back to the grind and I won't be able to do videos anymore anyway. So just to finish up, moving on from Game of Thrones, there's just all of the stuff about Sirius that I've kind of touched on already. Like, really, I've gone through all of this, I think, already. So that's good. It won't go on too much longer. Let's see. Oh, well, first, so this is a picture of the yin yang, and someone made the connection between Sirius A and Sirius B. How this was representative of the orbitals and the periapsis and the apopsis of Sirius A and Sirius B. But really, if the Sun and Sirius themselves are in a binary relationship, it would be representative of that too. So it's kind of like a fractal of what might be going on, right, between Sirius A and Sirius B. But again, let's keep in mind all of the official narratives that are saying this is impossible. And obviously, official narratives don't have a great track record right now, but when it comes to things like the movement of the stars, we have to accept the fact that observation like this has been going on for centuries, and there is something to it that can't just be discounted as, the night sky's fake. Really? That's like, there's all these narratives out there, as I've mentioned in the past in a prior video about, it's a sun simulator. The sun is actually a simulation now because it's so different from the old sun. And it's like, okay, time out, guys. Do you realize how gigantic the actual sun is? The sun is huge. Think about it. I mean, you can be sitting on a beach. I was just recently on a beach. I'm looking at the ocean. The ocean's huge, stretches on for miles. And that's just one little slice of the ocean. Goes on forever, as far as I'm concerned. And there's shoreline all over the world. The earth is huge. And yet we have this ball of light that can be seen from every part of the world that is experiencing daytime at that particular moment. It can be seen from everywhere. And yet you can watch a huge ship or a plane disappear into a little dot as big as a piece of sand over the horizon. And then you stand next to that plane or that ship and it dwarfs you in comparison to how big it is and how small you are. And yet you want to tell me that these, whoever these people are, this intelligence had the ability to create something as big as the sun and put it in the sky as a sun simulator? No. That's just impossible. Well, impossible is the wrong word to use. Is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. Is the night sky some fabricated projection that doesn't really exist and is like the Hunger Games arena where it's some fabricated thing that was built over the earth? Okay, sure, that's possible. In that case, did they just like change the sun's projection? Maybe, maybe, but I would say that's in the minority of possibilities. Okay, but I'll allow for it. Sure, that's a possibility. Anyway, moving on. So you have the whole Sirius, Canis Major, Dog Star thing, where obviously dog backwards is God, and you have "In God We Trust" on the back of the same dollar bill that has all of this other esoteric symbolism. In which God do we trust? And furthermore, is this God referring to Sirius and the metaphorical impact or potentially literal impact that that star has on our collective energy? I don't know. Maybe. Oh, and then the Karl Heinz quote. That was um, Karl Heinz Stockhausen. Now, if you remember, this is on the Skeleton Key blog post. There's a quote from him saying how 9/11 was the greatest work of art ever imagined in the cosmos. Mine's achieving something that could never be achieved in music. And then he has this other quote that I wasn't aware of where he says, or where it says, he wrote a piece called Sirius that and has claimed to have. Oh, okay, I got that backwards. So he wrote a piece called Sirius, and then he has claimed to have said on several occasions that he came from a planet in the Sirius system. To Stockhausen, Sirius stood for the place where music is the highest of vibrations, and where music had been developed in the most perfect way. So again, you have that whole music tie-in to the secret societies and Masonry in particular. You have Mozart. A lot of the classical musicians eventually became Masons. Mozart became a Mason later in his life, but he was actually friends with Adam Weishaupt. They lived in the same area, or at least they knew each other from some close proximity to each other. I can't remember the official story as far as that goes. Let's see. I mean, did Mozart really exist? Who knows? It's like a lot of these characters in history could be fabricated. Let's see. Oh yeah, speaking of like music and all of that, then there is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. And it's so funny when you look at the lyrics of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and how it's obviously referring to Sirius. And the reason I brought that up is because Mozart wrote the actual melody for Twinkle Twinkle Little Star that it's set to, along with others, but he didn't officially create it. There's this whole backstory where it was a French song that he kind of tweaked, and then it became this. And Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. That's Sirius, of course. I mean, then there will be the official narrative that says, well, it's just referring to all stars. Yeah, well, of course that's what they're going to say. When the blazing sun is gone, when he nothing shines upon, then you show your little light, twinkle, twinkle all the night. Now, look at the choice of words here. They could have said, when the shining sun is gone, when the bright sun is gone. No, they chose the word blazing because in Masonry, it's known as the blazing star, Sirius. So obviously, that's why they chose that word, blazing there. And then you have, then the traveler in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. He could not see which way to go if you did not twinkle so. And they would say that this is representative of how it used to be used as navigation because it was the brightest star in the sky. But then in Freemasonry, there's also the whole traveling man thing, where this is one of the things that fellow Masons say to each other. Are you a fellow traveler? And then they have different things that they respond to. And this is how one Mason can tell if they're talking to another Mason. So obviously there's Masonic terms all over this nursery rhyme, right? And this is something that all kids learn. I learned Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. I can hear it in my head right now. This is how they indoctrinate the young generations with all of this symbolism without us even knowing. And then that informs our general actions and behaviors. And they do this with the frequencies too, obviously. I mean, all of the popular music, even the stuff that you like and think is uplifting, I'm sure they put that into the same stuff, unless it's some like completely fringe artist who is totally detached from the system. But all of the mainstream popular bands, they're all doing this, I'm sure. They have some sort of magical adept crap going on in the background where they're injecting certain frequencies into the music and who knows what else into the actual movies and television shows. Oh, and that's the other thing. On the Wikipedia page of the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, in the catalog of songs, some institute did a catalog of all the songs that have ever been created. And the number for Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is 7666. And 7, of course, is the 7th letter of the alphabet, which is the G. And that's the G that is in Freemasonry. And obviously the G is because it's the perfect representation of the square and compass, right? The compass draws the round part of the G, and then the level or the square draws the line in the G. Obviously, going back to the whole idea about how these people, these initiates, this intelligence, they had all of this information when they started America, and even going well before that, They had this information when, going back to the Quetzalcoatl thing, when they colonized what we know as the Aztecs and Mayans. And then we look at the Mayan long count calendar and view it as some sort of ancient wisdom that we're only now rediscovering. Well, it's like, well, no, the same intelligence gave them that information too. So it's just like one thing that they know that has been hidden from everybody. And obviously Sirius plays a large part in that mythos. Now, the question is, how much of that is literal and how much of that is metaphor? That's the big question. Oh, right. And then there's the whole Hopi prophecy about the blue star Kachina. When it makes its appearance in the heavens, the fifth world will emerge. And right, that could be referring to Sirius on its way back to coming into contact as close as it possibly can with the sun and the whole golden age Yuga cycle thing. And maybe a part of that Hopi prophecy, if the binary star system is not accurate, but there is some sort of electrical circuit relationship between Sirius and our sun and the Earth, well, that could be reflected in the change of our own sun's color to a blue-white star that is mimicking Sirius. Maybe that's a part of it. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. But I think that's enough for now. Got into everything that I really wanted to get into. I mean, got into that. Yep. Let's see. Yep. That is everything. So I guess I'll end it on this. In God we trust. Is this in dog we trust? Is this in Sirius we trust? What? We know it's not the creator that they are trusting, obviously. This is self-evident through their actions. And any sort of, age of Aquarius enlightenment that they're referring to is going to be exactly what I was describing about how they ended Game of Thrones, or how they ended Lost and how they will likely end Game of Thrones, which is they're going to give us some sort of revolution. They're going to give us some sort of victory that makes us think that we have transcended the old system. I mean, isn't this what all the religions say about the Antichrist? That he's going to be viewed as the savior, right? They're going to provide this entity that many will view as having brought us from the brink, and then he will be worshipped for that reason, right? That is all a part of this. So don't think that any of this Age of Aquarius stuff is actually referring to some sort of enlightenment for us, the slaves, because that's never how it works. And like I said at the very beginning, or sometime near the beginning, the Yuga cycle thing is kind of like that messianic programming where it's, hey, thousands of years from now, when you're in your 100th reincarnation, you'll get to experience enlightenment and the golden age. So don't worry. We got it. We got you covered. Yeah. So I think I'll leave it right there. Later.